At this very moment, I feel like we are at a place in time in the housing market where we are experiencing a silent housing market crash that is starting to get louder and louder because we are already seeing home price declines on a national level. And in some areas of the country, particularly in Florida, in some metros, you can even see that home prices are down by as much as 10% year over year, which is a significant decline. But even in markets where the declines are not as severe, it still is quite a bit when you add it up over a long period of time. For example, if you're looking at a market that saw a 3% decline in home prices over the past year, you might say, well, that's not that much. Prices haven't come down nearly enough to make it affordable. Well, that's true. But if we see 3% declines year over year for 5 years, well, now you're looking at a 15% decline or possibly more if it accelerates. And my definition of a housing market crash since the beginning, since I started talking about this topic 3 years ago, was always the same. A 20% decline in home prices, at least in my opinion, is considered a crash, especially when it takes place in a relatively short period of time within like a 5 year window. Because we've never really seen that happen in the United States except for between 2007 and 2012. So let's talk about what's going on right now. First of all, existing home sales, they dropped 0.7% year over year in May, and April wasn't a whole lot better. New home sales in May, however, dropped a whopping 14%. And we can derive so much about the US economy just based on what's happening in the housing market. So let's say we see a situation where home prices decline nationally over the next year 5%. Doesn't sound like a lot, but it actually is a major impact on a lot of different things. For example, those lower home prices are going to put a huge dent in how consumers feel about their finances because you are now removing the wealth effect. And when you remove the wealth effect and people see the value of any of their assets going down, whether it's the stock market, their real estate, their gold and silver, whatever, it tends to put people in a situation where they want to pull back on their finances and not spend. And certainly a 5% drop in home prices nationally would be enough for people to be shaken up. And people would start to realize, like, yeah, I think things are starting to turn around now. But here's the thing. I wouldn't be too concerned about home prices falling nationally. You should be far more concerned about what home prices are doing where you actually live, in your neighborhood. That's where it really matters. It doesn't really matter what the national figures are saying. For example, I live in Florida and home prices are coming down basically everywhere in Florida at this point. But that doesn't matter to somebody who lives in the Northeast who's still seeing prices go up by 3, 4, 5% a year. Doesn't matter. Some economists are actually worried about a recession if we were to run into a situation where we see home prices fall on a national level for 6 to 8 months straight, because that would have another serious impact on people's spending decisions and consumer confidence and how people view the current economic environment. Honestly, I think we're already kind of at a situation like that. But if you look at what's happening with home sales, where we're seeing people pull back to a point where home sales are near 40-year lows right now, those are all homes that aren't being bought where people aren't buying a new TV for the house. People aren't buying a new dishwasher for that house. People aren't remodeling those houses. Nobody's buying them. So that's taking a significant impact on the economy. And remember, home builders are leading the way when it comes to the housing market right now. They are now selling brand new houses at roughly the same price as existing resale homes, which is something you rarely ever see throughout history. They're giving all types of incentives, mortgage rate buy downs, free upgrades on the home, and yet they're having a hard time. And that doesn't really give a whole lot of confidence for people trying to sell a house on the resale market right now, unless you are still in one of the hot markets. And one quick tangent I want to go on is somebody made a comment the other day that I responded to that was something like, well, I was just traveling and the airports were full, all the restaurants were full and all of this stuff. And I was like, yeah, I've seen that myself as well. That doesn't mean that everybody's doing well. All it really means is that people have credit cards and they continue to spend money. Whether it's money they have or not is an entirely different story, guys. Like, I never understood why people think, oh, just when you see people out there spending money, that somehow means that everyone's rich and no one is hurting financially. Because a lot of people spend money that they don't have. It's a well-known fact when we look at what's happening with personal debt levels in the United States. So looking at how busy a restaurant is, or how busy the airport is, or how packed a plane is, has no grounds in reality of how well off people are doing financially, at least in my opinion. Another thing that we're seeing right now happen is a drop in housing investment. We're talking about everything from housing construction to improvements to renovations on existing homes, everything. In fact, residential real estate investment activity started to fall pretty dramatically in 2022 and has stagnated ever since. And recently, the US saw 794 billion in private residential fixed investment in the first quarter of this year, which is actually down 15.6% from its peak in the first quarter of 2021. And according to Pantheon Macro, they said they expect residential investment to slow enough in order to subtract about 0.2 percentage points from the annualized GDP growth in the second and third quarters of this year. And right now, residential private investment in real estate accounts for about 4% of GDP as of the second quarter of 2024. And also, the housing market slowing down is already starting to have a major impact on the labor market. Think about it like this. The US has around 8 million construction workers who help build $2 trillion worth of residential and commercial structures in the US each year. And the rate of employment in this sector has decreased over the past year, which is directly in line with the sales slowdown that we're seeing in the housing market. According to the BLS, construction employment grew 1.5% year over year as of the May figures, which is nearly half the rate of growth at the same time last year. So how long is it going to be before we start losing construction jobs? Even the most recent jobs report showed construction adding jobs as of the June data as well. And then we have something called mortgage delinquencies. Those are starting to grow faster than any other type of debt form as of May of 2025, which is a huge red flag. In May, the early stage mortgage delinquencies posted the largest month-over-month increases over any other debt type. And the reason why that's important is because people usually prioritize their mortgage debt over other loans, like their car payment or credit card debt, things like that. So it's less common for people to fall behind on their house payment before they fall behind on other things. Now, the overall delinquency rates on mortgages are still lower than things like auto loans and student loans, but the increase that we saw is what's troubling. We saw increases in mortgages that were past due 30 to 59 days, as well as increases in loans that are past due by 60 to 89 days. And the only category that actually didn't grow is the late stage delinquencies between 90 to 119 days late. And if you think about it, it makes perfect sense because a lot of people qualified for a mortgage, say 2 or 3 years ago, when interest rates were lower, even though home prices were high. And since then, the cost of owning a home has completely exploded with homeowners insurance increases, property tax increases, the cost of maintenance and upkeep increasing. And in a lot of cases, those expenses have increased faster than what people can afford to pay. And on top of that, people qualified for record high mortgage payments as well. So a lot of people kind of got blindsided thinking that they could afford the payment at the time, which maybe they could, even their lender decided that they could, but since then, they really can no longer afford it. And this rise in delinquencies directly correlates with the rise in mortgage debt that the average borrower is carrying, because the average American homeowner's mortgage balance rose to $267,700, which is up almost $7,300 since the same time last year. So it's a 2.8% increase from May of 2024, and it's the highest year-over-year jump compared to other loan categories, including auto loans, credit cards, and personal loan balances. You see the amount of money that people owe rise. You also see the delinquencies start to rise as it becomes harder to pay off that debt. And a lot of these delinquencies can definitely be blamed on inflation because all of those costs have risen substantially in the past 2 or 3 years, and people were kind of blindsided by that. Well, now you suddenly don't have enough room in your budget to make all of your payments anymore. Therefore, mortgage delinquencies go up. So are we at a point where we have a wave of foreclosures hitting us? No, but things are not going in the right direction when it comes to people paying bills and being able to keep up with the cost of living, which I repeatedly point out as being the largest problem. Who cares what the jobs numbers say? Who cares what the year over year wage increases say? Who cares what home prices are if nobody can really afford anything? That's what really matters. But it's not all bad news because inventory levels are up to the point where we saw before the pandemic in many areas across the country. And homes are now taking longer to sell than they did over the past few years. And sellers are cutting prices in many different cases. The price cuts are at like 10, 12-year highs right now. About 20% of home sellers cut the price of their listed home for sale back in May of 2025, which is the highest share in 9 years, according to Realtor.com. So I was close. And the reason why this is good news is because it gives home buyers the luxury of time. No longer are you forced into a FOMO situation where you need to bid up on this house and offer over asking price and waive your inspection contingency just to get a home that is kind of mediocre. You don't need to do that anymore. But it still hasn't really been enough to turn around buyer sentiment on the housing market because even as of May, only 26% of people surveyed by Fannie Mae said it was a good time to buy a house. So people aren't being fooled by the situation just yet. But if you are actually out there looking, first of all, if you need a real estate agent, feel free to use my link down in the description below. Whether you need a buyer's agent or a seller's agent, I can set you up with somebody 100% for free. So feel free to take advantage of that. The link is in the description. But you can also take your time negotiating a much better deal on a house that is for sale, especially if you see multiple price cuts and the house is still listed. That's your opportunity, man. You can also usually look at the house several times if you need to. You can ask for a couple showings and see it 2 or 3 times, which is something that was kind of impossible to do just a couple years ago. And I think this is a good thing because when you have time as a buyer, it puts you in a position where you can make a more level-headed decision. Now, some people get analysis paralysis because now they have too many options and too much time, just like going to a restaurant that has too many options on the menu. That can be a problem. And some people, it leads them to indecision, which is also not really a good thing. But I would rather have too many options and too much time than be in the opposite situation that we were in a couple years ago. And think about this. Out of the 50 largest metro areas that Realtor.com tracks, 22 of them have seen inventory levels now exceed the levels that we saw before the pandemic between 2017 and 2019. That's almost half of US markets right now that have more inventory than they did before the pandemic. That is a huge, huge win for anybody looking to buy right now. I'll flash this up on the screen. You guys can look along with me. But here are the 10 metros that have seen housing supply exceed pre-pandemic levels. Denver, Colorado is #1 on the list, where inventory levels are now 100% higher than they were before the pandemic. Austin, Texas is 69% higher. Seattle, 61% higher. Dallas, Fort Worth, 56% higher. San Antonio, Texas, 58% higher. San Francisco, California, right across the bay from me here, 54% higher. Nashville, Tennessee, 44% higher. Orlando, Florida, 44% higher. Las Vegas, 29% higher. And Tucson, Arizona, 23% higher. And I see the complaints that people put out there, especially in the comments, that even live in some of these markets and say, yeah, I see the inventory rising, Michael. I see some price cuts, but it's still too expensive. You have to give it time. I don't know how many times I need to say this, but I will keep saying it until it sinks in. You need to give it time. If you're just now starting to see the price cuts, it's going to be years of this situation continuing, most likely, and years of these price cuts and years of more inventory building before you start seeing the real deals come up. Because in many cases, these houses are not selling, and the ones that are taking a very long time to sell, about 51 days on average. That's almost 2 months, guys, versus before houses that were selling in the snap of a finger. That is a huge improvement. You can't just sit there and expect the housing market to turn around and do a 180 in just a few months. It doesn't work like that. It's going to be a few years, just like it was whenever it started going up. It didn't just shoot up overnight. prices started climbing little by little by little, month over month, and over a period of a few years, it was able to go up about 40%. And another thing I would like to point out is that home prices do not need to fall as much as they went up. Why? Because of wage increases, number one. But besides that, let's just do some simple math here. If a house costed $250,000 before the pandemic and it went up 40%, now that house costs $350,000, right? But then let's say home prices come down by 20% over the next few years. Well, that house that's $350,000 today will come down to $280,000. So we don't need to see a 40% reduction in home prices, because the more the home increased in value, the less of the percentage you need to see it come down by. And don't forget about inflation. That is a huge factor here, because a $280,000 house in 3 years from now is actually cheaper than a $250,000 house 5 years ago because of inflation. So you got to start thinking in this mindset. You got to start thinking that we don't need to see massive reductions in home prices like we saw the increase of them, because the starting place for the increase was much lower than the starting place for the decreases are coming in. And mathematically, that works out in your favor. So don't brush off a 5% or a 10% reduction in home prices, because it is a lot. Make sure your expectations are in line with reality. Do not expect any of this to get fixed overnight, because it took time for the problem to develop and explode into what it is now. It is going to take time for the reversal. We're already seeing sellers in a situation where they're being forced to cut the price or maybe even offer a mortgage rate buy down, just like the home builders are doing. You need to remain patient, guys. I'm not telling anybody not to buy right now. If you find the house of your dreams, if you find exactly what you're looking for and you can afford it, go for it. I'm not trying to talk anybody out of that. All I'm saying is, if you're frustrated with where prices are right now and you feel like you don't have any hope, give it more time, because it is going to happen. The only thing that could possibly change that is the big, beautiful bill, which I already discussed in a previous video, which you guys can go check out. But still, it's probably mostly just going to have an impact on people that already own real estate. And just because we have more inflation due to government deficit spending doesn't mean that home prices can just go up forever, because people still need to be able to afford to buy those homes. And that's the real issue that we're in right now. And until that gets solved, we are going to have a housing crisis. Now, one last thing I wanted to talk about here is a little bit of an update on the Zillow ban for the private listings. And this is a problem that people need to pay attention to if you're somebody that wants to list a home for sale, or even if you're looking for a home for sale. Right now, there are two major lawsuits going on right now, one against Zillow and one against the National Association of Realtors. And the fight pretty much centers around the fact of whether listings should be universal and public or kept private by some brokerages. The current system is, when a broker puts a listing online, it typically appears within 24 hours on all of the real estate websites of going public, which gives the seller and the listing maximum exposure and a better chance of getting the highest sale price. And maximum exposure is especially important considering how slow the housing market has been. But right now, Zillow is banning any listings if they're not publicly put on Zillow and all the other housing platforms within 24 hours. So if you try to keep a listing private for more than 24 hours after it's live, Zillow is banning that listing. And Compass is the big company that wants to keep listings private, and they're suing Zillow because they're saying it's anti-competitive, and Compass essentially wants to keep their own listings exclusive on their own platform without sharing them on Zillow. But it turns out there was a study from Bright MLS where they looked at 100,000 home sales, and they showed that there's no price benefit for private sales, and private listings actually take longer to sell. And if you think about it, it makes perfect sense, because you're just having less people know about it. People don't know that the listing is live, and there's no exposure. If you don't know to go to Compass's website, for example, then you're never going to know that that place is even available for sale, especially if there's no real estate sign out front of the property and you're not able to physically drive by or anything like that. And one of the biggest concerns about private listings is, besides the exposure, It might reduce sales prices, which actually could be a good thing for buyers, and it could fragment the inventory system, making it so now people need to go to multiple different websites to be able to see all the homes that are truly for sale. And sellers are kind of sold a bill of lies when it comes to the private listing thing, because it's sold as like an exclusivity thing, especially when it comes to high-end or luxury listings. But really all you're doing is hurting your client and making it harder for anybody to know about that home being for sale. Really the only benefit to having private listings is mostly in the benefit of the brokerage company that is keeping those listings private, like Compass, for example, because they stand to earn more money on those sales because they can do in-house deals more often, meaning they can get both the buy side and the sell side of the transaction, because naturally Compass is listing the property. And if you would like to buy that property, well, naturally they're going to set you up with another Compass agent to put an offer in. So who is this really benefiting? It's benefiting the greedy real estate brokerages that just want to keep the whole piece of the pie for themselves. That's it. I've never liked having our listing data from real estate agents being public all over the internet, but now that it has happened, it's better that it's that way than that it's just private at some real estate company and you have to go through them to have any access or exposure to that listing, rather than giving you the freedom to choose any brokerage company you want to maybe take a look at that property or to make an offer on it for you. So the moral of the story here is that we are seeing some massive changes right now in the housing market. And even though they might not look massive, they really actually are, and are going to lead to big change over the next 3 to 5 years. And it's starting to look more and more promising for people that have been waiting patiently to buy a home. With wage increases going up and price declines coming down, that's a good combination for a patient home buyer. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to this channel. And if you don't want to wait for my next video to come out, check out this one on the screen right over here, and I'll see you in the next one.